Hi, I'm Ben Gelinas. I'm the Digital Creative Director at JackThreads.
I'm Talia Fisher, the Director of Product and UX.
So we've spent the last 6 months doing a major rebrand of JackThreads. Throughout the process, we've learned how to become or change from a company that was exclusively data-driven to thinking about our brand and actually trying to become a brand. We've had to shift a lot of mindsets and try to find a healthy balance between data-driven design and designing with brand in mind instead. So we're going to walk you through a few examples from like historical examples from when we were solely data-driven to some more recent ones where we let brand be a primary driver. So just a little bit of history about JackThreads. We started out in 2008 as a flash sale website. The entire structure of the company was based on data. Every single decision that was made was based on data. We would change, swap out email and website creative based on its performance, and there were daily and hourly revenue goals that drove really big decision making that sometimes only provided short-term wins. So this is how we functioned. We were practicing data-driven design, and there's a lot of other companies that are trying to do it. We did it well, but we also took it to a major extreme. We're not saying in this presentation that data-driven design is not important. What we're trying to say is that there can be blind spots if you're just solely focusing on the results from A/B tests. So we're going to walk you through a few historical examples where we let the data drive our design decisions instead of stepping back and looking at the bigger picture and the impact of those decisions. So let's start with some imagery. Which image do you guys think is more compelling? Do you think that the image on the left is more compelling or the image on the right? Who thinks the image on the left is more compelling? Who thinks the image on the right is more compelling? Okay, so I would assume that the image on the right is more compelling. It's a full lifestyle image. You see the entire outfit. He's smiling. You see an environment. You see more of the bag. So we have tested tons and tons of images across like multiple categories in email and acquisition ads, and the data has told us time and time again that the image on the left is more clickable. That's sort of what we've been testing, is like the clickability of an image. So tighter crops on products and no heads. So we took this very literally, and the takeaway was to remove everyone's heads. So we literally chopped off every model's head for months in our creative. And it keeps going and going and going and going. And this is this is just a small sample of some of that creative. Needless to say, the photography team hated us, and so did our models. Another thing the data told us is that the more options we gave our guy, the higher the daily revenue. So more events, more sales, more emails, more recommendation rails, more infinite scrolls. We would literally throw as much as we could in front of our guy in hopes that he would just click something and buy it. So this is an old homepage. This is not what it was in the last iteration, but it gives you an idea of where we were coming from. Tons of events, tons of sales. Here's an old email. This one makes me a little ill watching it animate. And then this is our product page. So you can notice that there's duplicate recommendation rails on the bottom and on the right. So this recommendation rail was the last one that was added. And when it was added, we didn't notice a lot of people interacting with it. It was actually less than 1%. But the people that did interact with it had a dramatically higher conversion rate and a higher average order value. So we listened to the data and we rolled it out. But as you can see, it really clutters the page and it doesn't really make for a curated shopping experience. And on top of that, we also have an infinite scroll at the bottom of the page to give you more options if you didn't like what was at the top. And also all the products in the infinite scroll aren't curated, so they're really just a random dump of products that we're just hoping that you click on something and buy it. So the last one I'll let Talia explain because it's very near and dear to her heart.
So I think everyone in this room knows that listening to data is great and it's important, but as Benny mentioned before, we were definitely taking it to an extreme. And when that happens, you run the risk of gray UX, which is basically when you make design decisions with the attempt to deceive or manipulate your users. This is something that we were doing specifically with our sign-up pop-up, the bastard child of our website that we call Vortex. So this is Vortex. Vortex is our user acquisition system. It's owned by the marketing team, and it's used to grow our email list, and therefore grow our business because we've found that email subscribers have an overall much higher lifetime value. On the left is a previous version of the design, and on the right is our current design. So the current design features a much smaller X in the top left corner, which is obviously, as you guys probably know, not a traditional place for a close button. As such, users are much less likely to see it and therefore think that they have to sign up in order to view the site. So we did test this, and when we did so, we saw that signups went up 123% on desktop, and the close rates went down 68% on desktop. So the data tells us this is massively successful, but common sense tells us that this is a shitty UX. And the UX of this specifically is something that we plan to look closer at in the very near future, but we have to do so cautiously just because of the significant impact that this has on our bottom line.
And we're hoping nobody from our marketing team is in the audience tonight. So needless to say, we were really, really good at using data to guide us. But what JackThreads was lacking was a brand or a voice. Up to that point, the brand had been value. We were just selling cheap things at even cheaper prices. There was nothing and no one to challenge us or challenge the way that we were behaving. We thought we were being successful because the data told us that we were being successful. So then something happened that got us all starting to think about how we were performing and what we were doing and if we were doing the right thing. So how did everything start changing? For one, we knew that the Flash business model was dying. It wasn't a long-term business plan. There was less remnant inventory for us to buy, and we were always relying on other brands' leftovers to sell. And as our CEO, Mark, always says, you're only as good as the products you sell. So we had already begun shifting from Flash sales to regular price retail, but we really needed to make the full transition and to remove the security blanket of launching daily deals to hit our revenue goals. We also had the addition of high-level leadership, and they came on with a real focus of quality. They knew that we had to differentiate ourselves from other brands and that we needed a plan to help us scale and keep users. So how are we going to do all of this? The first thing that we needed to do was build a brand. We needed to have something more than a shopping mall. We wanted to feel good about what we were doing, what we were selling, and how we were talking to our guy. We also wanted to launch our own clothing line so that we could focus on quality and value ourselves. We also wanted to cut down on the infinite amount of products and brands that were being sold on our site so that we could only focus on the best of the best to augment the private clothing line that we were making ourselves. And then most importantly to everybody in the audience, we wanted to update our digital portfolio to create a best-in-class experience that would bring the brand to life across all touch points. So the new JackThreads should stand for quality goods at a great value, curate our offering to feature the best of the best, and empower men to discover and own their own personal style.
So leadership from across several teams came together for a brainstorm to talk about how we translate this new brand into our site and our apps. We came up with a list of values that we wanted these experiences to embody and that would influence our future design work. So let's look at the timeline. From the point in which the brand launch was announced till the actual launch date, we only had 4.5 months to infuse brand within every touch point. This was unusual for us because it was an orchestrated hard date across all channels, whereas we're accustomed to flexible deadlines that can move if they have to. The global navigation was the first project where brand was actually being considered. With every project that followed, brand became a much more significant driver of the design strategy. So let's talk about the global nav redesign. The data told us that only a minority of users were actually using the navigation on our website, but those that did were converting at a much higher rate. So our objective became to improve the usability and increase the usage of navigation in order to lift overall sales. Because this project came immediately after the brand announcement, it was heavily driven by data, and brand was more of a secondary consideration at that point. So here's a look at our old design. The main things that we tried to address were there's basically just too much shit in there, and it's got poor visual hierarchy. And there's just nothing, it's not clear what's important or where the user should even focus. The next thing is that it's also just too tall. So as the user scrolls down, it sticks to the top. Being too tall takes away from the browsing real estate, which is problematic on our shopping pages where they're just trying to explore a product. Lastly, it's just not distinct enough from other page elements. In fact, it gets overpowered by some of the marketing messages surrounding it. So when users do want to get out of wherever they are, it doesn't draw them in. This is a look at our new design. So as part of this new design, we also introduced our new red brand color, not only in the nav, but also across all CTA buttons across the site. Something you'll notice is that brands is in this navigation, and historically we found that not a lot of users were actually clicking on brands within the nav, but in the end we decided to keep it, partially for brand relations, but also because featuring premium brands was now part of our new positioning, and so we felt that warranted representation within the navigation. Overall, desktop stats were up, mobile web stats were a little bit down, but the higher traffic on desktop over mobile web still made this new design win. But overall was another story. So when we look at a test, we look at, what users are actually using the navigation, but then we step back and say, okay, let's look at overall site performance. And when doing that, if we're looking at people using the nav and not using the nav, we saw that conversion rate was flat, so was add to cart, and revenue per session was actually slightly down. The analytics team determined that this slight dip was caused by the non-navigation related changes, AKA the brand color change. They estimated that this would have amounted to a $30K net loss for the month. Not huge, but definitely not what we had hoped for. Despite this, we still rolled out the change because we knew that the navigation was a better experience, and also changing the brand color at this point was just not an option. But what do you do when your brand color is potentially causing performance issues? That brings us to the infamous color gate test. So we thought that the dip in revenue per session may be caused by the usage of our new brand color, specifically in the cart. We hypothesized that it might be creating too much of a sense of urgency for users to proceed to checkout before they were actually ready to. So we decided to test just that one specific button color. Many people will advise against testing brand elements such as color, but just because this was so easy and isolated, we figured let's just run the test and see what happens. So the results were actually positive. And so in this situation, it was fine because like I said, we were just changing the button color in one place, but it's unrealistic to rely on always being able to choose colors based on performance. If we all chose brand colors based on what performed best, we would all end up with the same brand color, and then none of us would be able to differentiate ourselves. So the next project was the homepage redesign. This was something that was largely driven by the new brand, and our objective was to make a landing page that featured less content, but in a more impactful way. It was going to be launching after the new navigation, so we could factor that in. And also, at the time, our backend team had limited bandwidth, so we tried to come up with concepts that would require as little from them as possible. So this is a look at our old design, which when it was designed, was intended for a flash retail model. So it featured 9 sales at the top of the screen. It originally had 13, but previous testing showed that featuring less sales actually resulted in overall higher conversion rate and revenue per session due to the increase in usage of the navigation and category boxes. It also had a listing of all seasonally relevant categories, which was visually overwhelming, but the data had shown that these performed really well. Here's a look at our new design. So as I mentioned, the homepage redesign was mainly driven by brand. We wanted to move away from having the homepage serve as a menu for everything and anything on the site, and instead use it to highlight just our big initiatives prominently. The shift would allow us to do a better job of promoting a small handful of things, and then more targeted shoppers could use the global navigation to get where they wanted to go. And another goal of this was to establish a new brand aesthetic, which would permeate through the rest of the site design that followed. So we ended up with a large hero section at the top that would fit the browser both in terms of height and width. We dubbed this two-way responsive. It could feature either 1 or 3 heroes, but that was it. And that is a big deal given our more is more mentality of the past. And to make the homepage experience even more special for shoppers, we employed what we call elastic scroll. Elastic scroll allows the user to snap between panels with one quick scroll gesture, allowing them to quickly scan for relevant content and get where they want to go faster. The decision to use elastic scroll was not just about doing something cool for cool's sake. It was about enhancing the user's experience with a technically innovative feature. And it spoke to our brand values of making an experience that is innovative, considered, and effortless. After the hero panel, we featured a carousel of categories, which is shown on the screen right now. We hated the old presentation of the categories, but we knew we needed to represent them just due to how well they performed in the past. So this new treatment allows us to feature a large number of categories, but in a much cleaner and digestible format. This is a great example of how you can use both data and brand to inform your design. So since this project was driven more by brand than specific performance goals, we actually debated whether we should even run it as a test. In the end, we did choose to test it just to make sure that nothing was severely broken either from a technical or performance standpoint. But it definitely was not a true apples to apples A/B test, and we knew that. We did an early analysis after just 4 days, something our data team is loath to do, and it was definitely not statistically significant, but we did see some dips in performance. If we'd been judging this on data alone, like in the past, we probably would have rolled it back at this point, but we weren't doing that. This was part of a much larger branding initiative, and it ultimately wasn't hurting us significantly, so we moved forward with it as planned. Now that we've all committed to this new design, we plan to use data to optimize what we have and push performance even further in the future.
So as you can see, we're still learning how to balance the tension between brand-driven decisions and data-driven decisions. But we're miles ahead of where we used to be. We acknowledged our data addiction, and we've added another layer into our formula or process. We stop and think about results from a 2-week test before we go ahead and implement them. Data has played a huge role for JackThreads. It helped the business scale tremendously. But what we've learned is if you focus too much on testing in a silo, you can lose sight on bigger things like brand perception. And if you only focus on brand, you can lose sight on how to get users through your checkout flow. So we think it's all about checks and balances and not going too far either way. Many of you are probably already practicing data-driven design, or some of you are looking to get into data-driven design. We are just suggesting that you use a little caution and you make sure that you step back and put things through the extra filter before you move forward with them. And the one big takeaway that we thought would be relevant to this presentation is that you can't A/B test loyalty or brand perception in a 2-week period. So that's it. Thank you.